Montana Territory, 1889. The windswept prairie stretched endlessly beneath a merciless summer sun as Vaughn Kincaid wiped sweat from his brow and squinted at the distant horizon. At 25, he had already spent 7 years working cattle on the Double R Ranch, his lean, muscular frame and sun-bronzed skin a testament to the hard labor that had shaped him. His deep-set green eyes held the watchful gaze of a man who'd learned to trust the land more than people. A man's only real companion out here is solitude, he often told himself, a belief as deeply rooted as the prairie grass. Life had taught him that attachments were dangerous. His father's death in a cattle stampede and his mother's subsequent abandonment had carved that lesson into his soul. The frontier demanded self-reliance, not sentiment. What he wanted was simple: to save enough to buy his own small spread, raise cattle, and answer to no one but himself and the changing seasons. As he rode the fence line that afternoon, Vaughn's loyal blue heeler, Scout, loping alongside his dun stallion, he squinted at an unusual cloud of dust rising from the eastern road. The Double R was 20 miles from the nearest town, and strangers were rare enough to warrant caution. "What do you reckon, Scout?" he murmured, patting the rifle secured in his saddle scabbard. "Trouble or just someone lost?" As he approached, the source of the dust became clear: a small wagon with one wheel tilted at a sickening angle, its wooden spokes fractured. Beside it stood a young woman in a traveling dress the color of spring cornflowers, a wide-brimmed hat shielding her face as she examined the damage with visible frustration. Vaughn approached cautiously, maintaining a respectful distance. "Afternoon, ma'am. Looks like you've had some trouble." She startled and turned, revealing a face that caused Vaughn's customary composure to falter. She was perhaps 20 years old, with delicate features framed by rich chestnut hair twisted into an elaborate style that had begun to come undone in the heat. Her eyes were an unusual shade of amber, bright with intelligence and currently flashing with annoyance at her predicament. "Yes, this wretched wheel gave out entirely," she said, her accent refined in a way that immediately marked her as not from these parts. "I was assured in town that this road would lead to Fort Harrison, but I've been traveling for hours with no sign of civilization." "Fort Harrison's another 15 miles, Vaughn said, dismounting. "And you won't get there on that broken wheel." She sighed, removing her gloves to push back a strand of hair. Her hands were smooth, unblemished by labor, city hands. "I don't suppose you know how to fix it?" "I'm afraid my education neglected practical matters like wagon repair." "I can help," he said simply, already assessing the damage. "Name's Vaughn Kincaid. I work the Double R Ranch yonder." He gestured toward the distant line of cottonwoods that marked the ranch boundary. "Harriet Summers," she replied with a slight curtsy that seemed oddly formal in the dusty wilderness. "I'm most grateful, Mr. Kincaid." As Vaughn began unloading the wagon to lighten it for repairs, he noticed expensive trunks and cases unlike anything a typical traveler might carry. "You're a long way from home, Miss Summers." "Home is Helena now," she said, watching him work with evident curiosity. "Or it will be. I've come from Boston to join my father." Vaughn nodded without looking up. City folk were always passing through, bringing their strange ways and leaving again. They never understood what it took to survive here. This woman, with her fine clothes and smooth hands, would likely flee back east at the first blizzard or drought. "What brings a Boston lady to Montana Territory?" he asked, more to fill the silence than from genuine interest. Her hesitation was brief but noticeable. "Family matters," she said simply. "Father sent for me." As Vaughn worked to repair the wheel, Harriet surprised him by insisting on helping, holding tools and steadying the axle despite the dirt that soiled her fine dress. The sun was setting by the time he secured the last spoke. "It'll hold to Fort Harrison," he said, wiping his hands on a bandana. "But not much further." Harriet looked at the darkening sky with concern. "I don't suppose I could reach it before nightfall." "Not safely," Vaughn answered. "These roads aren't kind after dark, especially to strangers." He hesitated, his ingrained wariness of entanglements warring with frontier hospitality. "Double R's only 3 miles back. The foreman's wife could put you up for the night, and I can escort you to Fort Harrison tomorrow." The relief in her eyes was evident. "That would be most kind, Mr. Kincaid." As they traveled to the ranch, Harriet asked intelligent questions about cattle raising and ranch operations that surprised him. When they arrived at the collection of log buildings that formed the heart of the Double R, Mrs. Pearson, the foreman's wife, welcomed Harriet with the eager hospitality of a woman starved for female company. That night, as Vaughn sat on the bunkhouse porch watching the stars emerge, he found his thoughts drifting to the strange city woman with the amber eyes who had handled a difficult situation with unexpected grace. It unsettled him how easily he could recall the exact shade of her hair in the sunset light. Just passing through, he reminded himself firmly. By this time tomorrow, she'll be gone. Morning brought startling news from town. Riders arrived at dawn with telegrams and newspapers announcing the arrival of Montana's new territorial governor, Roland Summers, who would be taking residence in Helena. The accompanying photograph showed a distinguished gentleman, and standing beside him, unmistakably, was Harriet Summers. When Vaughn brought her breakfast, she was already dressed and packing, her expression guarded when she saw the newspaper in his hand. "So, Miss Summers," he said, unable to keep a note of accusation from his voice, "you failed to mention your father's position. Would it have changed how you fixed my wheel?" she challenged, lifting her chin. "No, but then it wasn't relevant," she said simply. "I've spent my entire life being the governor's daughter or the senator's niece. For once, I wanted to be just Harriet." Before Vaughn could respond, chaos erupted outside. Shouts, the thunder of hooves, and the foreman's voice raised in alarm. Vaughn rushed out to find 4 armed men on horseback, their leader a hard-faced individual Vaughn recognized as Miles Holcomb, a notorious cattle rustler who'd threatened the Double R before. "Heard the governor's girl is here," Holcomb drawled, his hand resting too casually near his holstered pistol. "Thought she might like an escort to Helena." Vaughn stepped forward, deliberately placing himself between the riders and the door. "Miss Summers already has an escort arranged." Holcomb's smile didn't reach his cold eyes. "Governor Summers just arrived in Helena. Word is he's bringing law to the territory, courts, judges, hangings. Some folks might see his daughter as valuable. Insurance against overzealous governance." The threat was unmistakable. Behind him, Vaughn heard the door open and felt Harriet's presence. "I believe the penalty for kidnapping is quite severe in any territory," she said, her voice remarkably steady. As his threatening ranch hands who are simply doing their job. Holcomb's eyes narrowed. "Pretty and spirited. Your father should have kept you safe in Boston, girl." "My father," Harriet said with quiet dignity, "believes Montana's future depends on bringing civilized values to the frontier. I intend to help him." The tension stretched until the foreman emerged from the barn with his shotgun, followed by 3 ranch hands similarly armed. Outnumbered, Holcomb spat in the dust. "Another time, then," he said, wheeling his horse around. "Give your father my regards." After they'd ridden away, Vaughn turned to Harriet. "You need to leave immediately. Not for Fort Harrison, straight to Helena." "I'm not afraid of threats, Mr. Kincaid." "You should be," he said grimly. "Holcomb doesn't make empty ones." Within the hour, they were traveling with an armed escort of 4 ranch hands. Vaughn rode beside Harriet's wagon, vigilant for any sign of Holcomb's return. To his surprise, she maintained her composure, though her knuckles were white where she gripped the reins. "How did you know Holcomb?" she asked finally. "He's been rustling cattle for years," Vaughn explained. "Killed 2 men last spring. Your father's appointment has the outlaws nervous. They've operated unchecked too long." "Then my father is right to prioritize law enforcement," she said. "This territory deserves better." Vaughn gave her a skeptical glance. "Law only works when people respect it, Miss Summers. Out here, respect comes from understanding the land and the people who work it, not from Eastern books or politics." "And you believe my father and I can't possibly understand because we're from the East?" Her voice had a dangerous edge. "I believe understanding takes time," he said carefully. "Time you haven't spent here." Their journey to Helena took 2 tense days, during which Harriet surprised Vaughn repeatedly. She rose before dawn without complaint, helped make camp, and engaged the ranch hands in conversation about their lives and work. When one of the horses pulled up lame, she demonstrated unexpected knowledge of horse anatomy, helping to fashion a poultice from prairie herbs. "My grandfather raised thoroughbreds in Virginia," she explained when she caught Vaughn's surprised look. "I spent summers with him until I was 16. Gradually, Vaughn found himself revising his initial judgment. Harriet Summers might have city manners, but beneath them was a practical intelligence and willingness to learn that he had to respect. On the second evening, as they camped near a small creek, Harriet sat beside him by the fire after the others had turned in. "Why the double R?" she asked. "You seem capable enough to run your own ranch." Vaughn stared into the flames. "Working toward it. Need another 2 years to save enough for a decent start. And then, a small spread. Nothing fancy. Just mine." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Independence matters to you." "Out here, it's everything," he agreed. "No one to depend on but yourself." "That sounds lonely," she observed. Vaughn shrugged. "Lonely is safer than betrayed. My mother remarried 6 months after my father died, moved east with her new husband, left me with my uncle's family at 14. He hadn't meant to reveal so much, and the admission hung uncomfortably between them. "I'm sorry," Harriet said softly. "My mother died when I was 12. Father buried himself in politics afterward. I was raised more by governesses than family." The unexpected connection of shared loss settled between them, softening something in Vaughn's chest that had been rigid for years. They talked until the fire burned low, about horses and books and the vast Montana skies. When she finally rose to retire to her tent, Harriet paused. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Kincaid. I won't forget your kindness." "Vaughn," he corrected. "Just Vaughn." Her smile in the firelight stayed with him long into his watch. Helena appeared on the horizon the following afternoon, its buildings rising from the plains like an improbable dream. As they approached the governor's residence, a grand house on the hill overlooking the growing city, Vaughn felt the weight of the social divide between them more keenly than ever. Governor Summers himself came out to meet them, embracing his daughter with obvious relief. He was a tall, distinguished man with the same amber eyes as Harriet, though his hair had silvered. "When we heard about Holcomb's threats, I feared the worst," he said, before turning to Vaughn with genuine gratitude. "Mr. Kincaid, I understand we owe you a considerable debt." "Just doing what anyone would, sir," Vaughn said, uncomfortable with the attention. "Hardly," Harriet interjected. "Mr. Kincaid first helped me repair my wagon, then provided safe escort despite considerable risk to himself. The governor insisted they all stay for dinner, an elaborate affair that made Vaughn acutely conscious of his trail-worn clothes and frontier manners. Yet Harriet, now dressed in finery befitting her station, seemed determined to include him in every conversation, deftly translating between her father's political interests and Vaughn's practical knowledge of the territory. As the evening concluded, Governor Summers made an unexpected proposal. "Mr. Kincaid, I find myself in need of someone who understands this territory beyond the city limits. Would you consider a position as my liaison to the ranching communities? The salary would be substantial." The offer was tempting. The money would help him achieve his dream of independence faster. Yet something felt wrong about abandoning the work he knew for political circles where he didn't belong. "I appreciate the offer, sir, but my place is with the cattle." Later, as Vaughn prepared to return to the double R with the other hands, Harriet found him in the stable. "You turned down a position that many would covet," she said. "A position I'm not suited for," he corrected, adjusting his horse's saddle. "I think you underestimate yourself, Vaughn Kincaid," she said. "But I respect your choice." He turned to face her, struck again by how at odds she seemed with his life, her in her silk dress, him with his calloused hands and sun-weathered face. "Your father needs advisors who understand politics. I understand cattle and open country. Perhaps Montana needs both," she suggested. "Will you at least consider visiting when you're in Helena? Father values honest opinions, and they're in short supply among politicians." Something in her expression, hopeful but resigned to disappointment, made Vaughn realize she expected him to refuse any further connection. The realization bothered him more than it should have. "I come to Helena for supplies every month," he said finally. "I could stop by." Her smile was worth the compromise. Over the following months, Vaughn's visits to the governor's residence became regular occurrences. Initially, he came with specific concerns from the ranching community: water rights disputes, cattle trail access, protection from rustlers. Governor Summers proved surprisingly receptive, implementing several of Vaughn's suggestions and earning cautious respect from ranchers who had expected an Eastern politician to ignore their needs. But increasingly, Vaughn found himself lingering after business was concluded, drawn into conversations with Harriet about books she thought he might enjoy or her growing interest in Montana's indigenous peoples and natural resources. She had begun documenting local plant species, combining scientific observation with practical knowledge gathered from settlers and native tribes alike. By early winter, Vaughn admitted to himself what the double R hands had been teasing him about for weeks. He was falling in love with the governor's daughter. The realization terrified him. Their worlds couldn't be more different, and his hard-learned lesson about attachments leading to pain haunted him. Each time he rode away from Helena, he promised himself it would be the last visit. Yet he always returned. December brought the harshest winter in memory, with blizzards sweeping across the territory. When the snow temporarily abated, Vaughn made the dangerous journey to Helena with urgent news. Cattle were dying, smaller ranches facing ruin without emergency measures. He arrived half-frozen to find the city in crisis as well, with food shortages and depleted coal supplies. Governor Summers immediately organized relief efforts, with Harriet coordinating volunteer groups to distribute supplies to the most vulnerable residents. When she saw Vaughn, she rushed to him, concern evident in her face. "You shouldn't have traveled in this weather." "Had to," he said simply, stamping snow from his boots. "People are suffering out there." Together with the governor, they developed a plan, using military wagons to deliver hay and supplies to outlying ranches and settlements, with Vaughn guiding the effort based on his knowledge of which areas were most isolated. For 3 weeks, they worked side by side through exhausting days and frozen nights. Vaughn witnessed a side of Harriet he hadn't fully appreciated before: her organizational brilliance, unflagging energy, and genuine concern for people regardless of their station. She treated ranch wives with the same respect as the society ladies of Helena, listening to their needs and ensuring help reached them. One night, returning from a particularly difficult delivery to a remote homestead, their wagon became stuck in a snowdrift. With darkness falling and the temperature plummeting, they were forced to take shelter in an abandoned line shack until morning. As Vaughn built a fire in the small stove, Harriet wrapped herself in blankets, her face pale with cold. "At least we got the supplies to the Emerson family," she said, her breath visible in the freezing air. "You're not what I expected," Vaughn admitted, feeding kindling into the growing flames. "Oh, and what did you expect from a governor's daughter?" Despite her exhaustion, there was amusement in her voice. "Someone who'd have fled back east at the first hardship," he said honestly. "Someone who'd consider herself above the problems of common folk. Is that why you kept your distance at first?" She moved closer to the stove as heat finally began to radiate from it. "Partly," he acknowledged. "I've learned that people leave, Harriet. They always do. Some stay," she said quietly, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Some choose to build something lasting, even knowing the challenges." The warmth between them had nothing to do with the stove. For the first time in years, Vaughn allowed himself to imagine a future different from the solitary one he'd planned. One with companionship, with someone who understood both his love for this harsh land and the possibility of making it better. That night, huddled for warmth in the one-room shack, they spoke of dreams and fears, of childhood memories and future hopes. When dawn broke, something fundamental had shifted between them. They returned to Helena to find Governor Summers pacing anxiously, relief flooding his face at their safe arrival. That afternoon, as Vaughn prepared to return to the Double R, the governor took him aside. "Mr. Kincaid, I've observed your dedication these past months, both to the territory and, I believe, to my daughter." Vaughn straightened, uncertain where the conversation was heading. "Sir, let me finish," the governor said firmly. "I came to Montana with Eastern notions about suitable matches for Harriet. I imagined a politician or businessman who could advance our family interests." He smiled ruefully. "These weeks have shown me that Montana requires different values: character, resilience, practical knowledge. You've demonstrated all three." Hope flared painfully in Vaughn's chest. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that if your intentions toward my daughter are honorable, you'll find no opposition from me." The path forward suddenly seemed both terrifyingly open and filled with obstacles. "Governor Summers, I have no fortune, no political connections. Only plans for a small ranch that may take years to establish." "And yet," came Harriet's voice from the doorway, "you have something many wealthy men lack: integrity and a true understanding of what matters here." She stepped into the room, her expression resolute. I've watched you put others before yourself repeatedly. I've seen your vision for what Montana could be. The governor cleared his throat. I'll leave you two to talk, he said, tactfully withdrawing. Alone with Harriet, Vaughn struggled to articulate the fears that still held him back. Your life here, it's full of possibilities, important work. I can't offer you the society you're accustomed to. Perhaps I don't want that society, she countered. Perhaps what I want is purpose, and someone who sees me as more than a political asset or social ornament. She moved closer, her determination unmistakable. I love Montana, Vaughn. I love its people and possibilities. And I've come to love a certain stubborn rancher who refuses to believe he deserves happiness. The words he'd held back for months finally broke free. I love you, Harriet. But loving someone means wanting what's best for them, even if it's not you. Don't you dare presume to decide what's best for me, she said fiercely. I know my own mind and heart. Their first kiss was inevitable, a culmination of months of growing understanding and respect. When they finally parted, Vaughn felt decades of careful emotional fortification crumbling away. I still need to build my ranch, he said softly. I need to know I can stand on my own. Then build it, Harriet said. But know that I'll be waiting, and that independence doesn't have to mean isolation. Spring brought transformation to the Montana landscape, green replacing white, wildflowers erupting across the prairies, and Vaughn Kincaid taking the most significant risk of his life. With his savings and a loan secured against his sterling reputation, he purchased land along the Yellowstone River, fertile bottomland for hay production, good water access, and rolling hills perfect for cattle. Throughout the summer, he built first a sturdy cabin, then corrals, and a small barn. He purchased a modest herd of quality cattle and 2 exceptional breeding bulls. Every decision was made with an eye toward the future, not just his future, but the one he dared to imagine with Harriet. They exchanged letters weekly, hers filled with updates on her father's progressive policies and her own growing involvement in territorial education initiatives. She had begun advocating for a women's college in Montana, arguing that the frontier's daughters deserved the same opportunities as its sons. In August, Vaughn rode into Helena with a purpose beyond his regular visit. The small box in his pocket felt impossibly heavy as he approached the governor's residence, now familiar but still intimidating. He found Harriet in the garden, cataloging plant specimens for her ongoing botanical research. When she saw him, her face lit with the smile that still made his heart stutter. You're early this month, she said, setting aside her notebook. Is everything all right at the ranch? Everything's ready, he said simply. The house, the land, the herd. I've built what I set out to build. Understanding dawned in her eyes as he took her hands in his. Harriet Summers, I came to Montana believing that independence meant standing alone. You showed me that real strength comes from connection, to the land, to community, and to someone who sees you truly. He knelt, drawing the small box from his pocket. I love you. Will you build a life with me? The ring was simple, a Montana sapphire set in silver, but her eyes filled with tears as he placed it on her finger. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. Their wedding in October united seemingly disparate worlds, territorial officials and politicians alongside ranch hands and frontier families. Governor Summers walked his daughter down the aisle with undisguised pride, while Mrs. Pearson from the double R dabbed tears with her handkerchief. As they exchanged vows beneath the golden cottonwoods on Vaughn's now there ranch, Harriet wore a gown that symbolized their shared vision. Elegant Eastern silk adorned with beadwork created by women from the Crow tribe, with whom she had established a respectful friendship through her botanical studies. I take you not as my possession, but as my partner, Vaughn promised, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. Together, we'll build something neither of us could create alone. Harriet's amber eyes shone with certainty. I choose this land, this life, and you, Vaughn Kincaid, not despite the challenges, but because facing them together gives them meaning. The celebration lasted into the night, with fiddle music and dancing under stars that seemed to Vaughn more brilliant than he'd ever seen them. When the last guests departed, he carried his bride across the threshold of the home he'd built with his own hands. 2 years later, on a crisp autumn evening, Vaughn sat on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching Harriet rock their infant son, William, while their daughter, Elizabeth, now nearly 18 months old, played with wooden blocks at his feet. The ranch had prospered beyond his cautious hopes, with the herd doubled and a reputation for quality stock spreading throughout the territory. Harriet's work had flourished as well. Her botanical studies had been published by a scientific journal in Chicago, and the women's educational initiative she championed had secured funding for a college that would welcome its first students the following year. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" she asked, noticing his contemplative expression. "How wrong I was," he admitted with a smile, reaching out to stroke William's downy head. "I thought the frontier was no place for love, that survival meant keeping everyone at a distance. And now," she leaned into his touch as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Now I know that love doesn't weaken you against life's hardships. It gives you the strength to face them," he said. "Everything meaningful I've built has been because of loving you, not despite it." The setting sun painted the distant mountains in hues of gold and purple, the beauty of their shared home spreading before them. Governor Summers, now serving in the state legislature after Montana achieved statehood, was expected for Sunday dinner, a regular tradition that brought their family together. "Do you ever regret it?" Vaughn asked softly, choosing this life over Boston society. Harriet's laugh held all the certainty he could ask for. "Not for a moment. This is where I belong, where we belong, building something that matters, day by day, together." As twilight deepened, they sat wrapped in the contentment of a love that had not just survived the frontier, but had been strengthened by it. A love built on respect, partnership, and the courage to believe in connection despite life's uncertainties. In each other, they had found not just companionship but a shared purpose, to create a home where tenderness and strength existed in perfect balance, just like the land they both loved.